Hi, my name is Rafa Lombardino, and this is Translation Confessional. Living in a bilingual household.
Hi, my name's Vince Lombardino. I'm the husband of Hafa.
Yeah? You just gotta say it correctly. Hafa, not
Yeah.
Rafa, Rafaela. Okay, good.
Raffaella.
Yeah. After 20 years, yeah, at least
Yeah.
you call me by my right name.
Well, sometimes.
Okay, so what is it like and how crazy is it to live in a bilingual house?
It's something to. At first, it was something to adjust to.
But at first we didn't have kids, so it was mostly English that we would
Yeah.
speak. But
Yeah.
what about with the kids? Because we don't plan and we end up yelling the same thing at the kids, but in two different languages.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the kids' reaction to, especially when you see the kids doing the translation going in between you and I.
Yeah. Because they'll just reply to me and throw some Portuguese words in there, or I'll say something to them and they'll turn around and go talk to you.
Yeah.
But they say it in English.
Right.
Yeah. So, or even with each other. Like today, it's like, I just told Marissa that I was making chicken and I said it all in Portuguese. And she's like, okay. And then Lorenz was like, what is she saying? What is she saying? And she just turns to him and just gives the whole message and interprets what I just said. But yeah, I just think it's funny that sometimes we didn't even, try to plan it. And you yell at them something to discipline them in English while I'm saying the same thing in Portuguese at the same time. So...
Yeah, but then they also use it as a convenience sometimes, saying, I don't understand, I don't know what you mean. But they do that regardless what language we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not that they don't understand the language, they just don't pay attention and they just don't care.
Yeah, but I think the more entertaining parts is when the kids, when they come to me like I didn't hear you, and they interpret what you said into English. And I sit there going, yes, I heard what Mom said.
Okay. But they don't really change. Lorenzo changes it sometimes. No, but Mom said, but Dad said. Marissa not so much, but Lorenzo tries to play it of how you interpret incorrectly.
Well, as we know, it's like, Lorenzo will interpret the way he wants to interpret it.
Yeah.
But that's why, most of the time, it's like I hear what you're saying, and then they come and then he says it in his way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you got the message because you heard it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was that comment again that you made about how going to Brazil and then now my cousins who are a little younger than me and also have kids and how they talk to their kids in Portuguese? What was the comment that you made again?
You pretty much say the same things to all the kids, like all the terminology, all the sayings, but it's something that I've recognized, just not with your cousins, though. I recognize, a lot of Brazilians when they speak to their kids, they use a lot of the same terminology, a lot of the same sayings. It's just something picked up where it's just like, oh, okay, it's very common to say certain sayings. I couldn't come to tell you right off the top of my head what they are, but when I hear them, it's like, oh, okay, I'm very familiar with what that means.
Because it's just saying that all Brazilian mothers sound alike. They all say the same.
Pretty close at times, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just when we were at the Brazilian... the Brazilian restaurant, we were picking up the food, they had the parents with the little kid.
Yeah.
And they're talking to their little daughter the exact same way as you used to talk to Marissa and Lorenzo
when they were little. Yeah,
when they were little. Same type of, it's the same, almost like same not just the words, but also kind of the inflection, the kind of the tone.
Yeah.
Is very similar to.
So you can pretty much just take the Brazilian parents out of Brazil, but you can't take the Brazilianness out of the parents. No matter if they're here, they're there.
No, it's like, no matter where you go. I mean, when we're at the airports and we see the Brazilian kids running around and parents talking to them, it's all the same.
The one thing I noticed is that, like, when Marissa was younger and I would take her to, like, dance class or to gymnastics at the YMCA, and I may be saying the cutest thing to her in Portuguese, but people around always think that I'm scolding her. Like, I'm just, yelling and telling her off. And it's like, no, I'm just saying, oh, you look so cute. I'm just going like that, but saying something in Portuguese. And people just always think it's aggressive. So,
that comes to one thing I've told you, where it seems when I was first learning the Portuguese and getting familiar with it, it's like you have one extreme to the next. There's no middle area. It's very, you're scolding or you're very sincere and loving. It goes from one extreme to the next.
But it all sounds the same.
But it's just like the tone. But it's just like, oh, that's so sweet. That's so sweet. It's like, ooh, whoa, what's wrong with her? Calm down, calm down.
So throughout the year, I mentioned you a lot on the podcast, but there was one episode that I talked about words that I learned from you. And the funny thing is that most of them were about food or drinks. It wasn't intentional, but that's what I start to remember. Do you remember how frustrating it was when you first started talking about foods from here? And when we were just met in Brazil, I had never been to the United States, and you're just telling me some stuff that is like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, the best example is when we were at the beach, and you and the kids were playing taco, and I was like, oh, that reminds me. Oh, that sounds good. It makes me hungry. And then explaining to you, I'll wait until you have a taco, and you're asking me, well, what is a taco? And I'm all, well, it's made with a tortilla. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, what's a tortilla? It's just like, okay, this is not going very well, because first you got to know the basic ingredients before you understand what the food is.
Yeah, because I could already speak English to you. It wasn't like a language problem, but I had no idea what Mexican food was, because this is July 2001. There weren't even Mexican restaurants in Brazil. We had a lot of Mexican soap operas on TV, but not really the food. So you try to explain it to me, and all I could think about when you say taco is the game taco that we play that kind of looks like cricket. So you try to explain to me, and I'm like, I have no reference of that. I have no idea.
Yeah, and then every single time I'm in Brazil, I hear the word, I'm thinking of food.
Yeah, but oh well. Now Brazilians are more aware of. We have some Mexican restaurants even in my town, and we tried, and it's like not the real stuff. But especially living so close to Mexico, what we ate there was like, that was okay, but it's not Mexican.
Yeah, and that's also the big difference is since we live so close to the border, we get the full experience that a lot of people don't get.
Yeah. It was funny how we tried to get tortilla chips there at the restaurant, and they had no idea what we were talking about because they call them nachos. And nachos for us, it's the tortillas with the cheese melted on top of it. But just the regular plain tortilla chips there, they call it nachos. So it's almost like, a brand name that they just expanded on it. And it's like, okay, whatever, just bring me nachos then.
Yeah.
Even though that's not what we're ordering in our heads, because nacho is something completely different.
Yeah, and the other part of that is when they brought out the tray of the hot sauces, and your brother's making me try each one, and we went to the very hottest one, and the hottest one is still nowhere near what you can get here or even across the border. So the hot sauce is not really hot.
It wasn't. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. It's, especially myself, who has grown up having hot sauce my whole life. Yeah. That's the one where, especially when you see other people try it, and they think it's the hottest thing in the world.
Yeah. My parents can never have it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is funny because when I first moved here, I could not have any hot sauce because my eyes would start tearing up, my nose started bleeding, and almost 20 years later, I just got used to it. I don't go as, hot sauces. You would try it, or even Marissa would try it, but I can still survive.
Well, when you first moved here, you thought Taco Bell was hot.
Yes,
The Taco Bell
sauce was hot. Yeah, so it was too much for me. Yeah,
and that was just really.
Well, I had no idea, and even though we have parts of Brazil that have very hot food, but I never tried it. I didn't grow up eating hot food. My parents don't like it, so I never was exposed to it. So it took some time, but now I can enjoy it.
Yeah. But now Mexican food is probably one of the main foods that we eat a lot.
Yeah, if it's takeout, it's mostly Mexican food. Yeah. And then I make guacamole that is different from the guacamole here, but it's not really the guacamole that we see in Brazil. That is different avocados. It just doesn't work the same way. And then my American friends like my guacamole better the way I make it. So I guess I earned some points from that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your guacamole it depends on where you go in Mexico, because guacamole also changes when you go to Mexico. Yeah. And your guacamole is kind of close to some when you get more down into Mexico.
Yeah.
Some of the flavors change a little bit, but it's not.
It's mostly the main ingredient, the avocado itself, because you've seen the avocados in Brazil and they are different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you remember just picking one from the tree, and they're bigger. It's completely different. So, and we don't really make guacamole in Brazil, and people just think that it's weird to have that with salad or with chicken, because I remember how weirded out you were when I first said, "Oh, that's a smoothie. That's why you make smoothies or dessert."
Yeah, was it milk avocado smoothie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something.
I still like it.
No.
I used to drink it as a baby in a baby bottle. That's, you get avocado, you get milk, you just make a smoothie and you just drink it, and our kids liked it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's just like we were down there. I tried it once, and I think that's all I'm going to ever try it. Is that one time.
The other thing that I was remembering was how when we first met and we were like getting to know each other and talking, walking down the beach avenue and just talking, and we were being followed by this one little girl who was probably 6-7 years old on her tricycle, and she's following us trying to listen because she doesn't understand what's going on, because we're just speaking English in Brazil, in my town, and it's not something that you see all the time in my town. You remember how hard it was for you to communicate with people. So I always remember that little girl following us when back in 2001 when you went there for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, and she was just following us, and she was just amazed, just trying to listening in of what's going on.
Because it's something that she only probably heard on TV. So it's these are TV people in front of me because they're speaking this different language that I don't know.
Yeah, because I remember when we looked at her, it's almost like she was in a trance. Like, what are they speaking? Or it's like, wait, how come I might be understanding one or two words?
I don't know. She was too small too. I think she was just more mesmerized of this is what TV sounds like than trying to understand. But then there were teenagers that I remember later on, probably 10 years later, 2010 or so. We're walking down. We're speaking kind of soft because we don't want to, speak too loud in English and attract bad attention. But these two kids, teenagers on a bike, they heard us and they kind of started to go a little slower. We went past them again. Then they started just following us on the bike, and they started speaking English to one another. So do you remember that?
Yeah. And actually, they're still in. You hear it more now, but I remember when I first would go down there, it felt rare to hear people speaking English walking by, and it's because it would stick out so much. Now when we go down there, it doesn't seem I'm not as surprised as much now, because it seems like more and more people are learning English in your city. But when I first went there, is, you know, like the story goes, it's like when I remember making my reservation, you know, I sent an email making my reservation, and they were replying back in English. It's like, you know, is anyone able to speak English there? Yes, we'll have someone will be on staff. Someone's always here to speak English. And then I remember when I got there, I went to the counter and you know, asked, you know, is anyone here able to speak English? And then they got the woman. She came to the counter. I told her I have a reservation. You know, I told her my name, and she looked at me like I was speaking a different language. It went right over her head. And then I remember all the times that me and my friends have been down in Mexico. I'm like, okay, now I got to really break it down. I got to talk to her like almost like I'm in elementary school. Yeah. So I got to break it down to the simplest form. Yeah. Because the other part is what happens to a lot of Americans is they do not realize how much slang we use every single day. Mm-hmm. You
just use one, went over her head.
Yeah.
You're going to have to translate that into plain English so people can understand.
Right. I mean, and that goes even to, you know, the discussion we've had when I visit my cousins in Sicily. When I visit them, it's almost like I'm excited to see them, and I don't catch myself and I don't think about it until I kind of settle in. Once I settle in, then it's easier I feel like it's easier for her to communicate, because they seem to miss a lot of what I'm saying, even though some of them speak very minimal English. It's they're learning too, but still it's the same.
But even the girls, well, they're my age, but it's like the girls, they have pretty good level of English, but the slangs that you were throwing around and how you were just using contractions, it was something that doesn't flow as well for someone who is an English speaker that has English as a second language. So most of the times you were saying something, you're all excited, just found family, and just, I had an episode about that, and you're just excited talking about things in English, and they are having a hard time following because first it's just too fast, and second it's just all the slangs. So even with my limited Italian, I would sometimes just break it down to plain English, because having had the experience of teaching English to kids and adults in Brazil, I knew how to, they won't understand this level, but if you break it down to this level, then it's easier to just, instead of using slang, you actually have something more, I wouldn't say formal, but something, it's plain English. Or just try to turn the sentence around in a way that it matches kind of an Italian expression that they will use. So it's easier to just,
But that's one part that it's very difficult for a lot of Americans to say, okay, stop using slang, just simple English. A lot of Americans will have a difficult time communicating. It is. It's very difficult, because if you sit down and you try to have someone sit there, because slang is such a common part of our language here, that we don't realize how much we're using until you kind of get out of it. Out of there. And that's the benefit that I've had growing up, is I've constantly had friends that like English was their second language. I've been to Mexico many times, going to Brazil, going over to Italy. So it's like I have that experience that a bunch of people that I know that live here don't have. How to try to communicate. And I mean, even myself, it's very difficult even for me to sit there and do it, because no matter how simple I try to break it down, it's just like I'm still going to have parts where they're still going to look at me like, can you please repeat that? Or okay, I don't understand, because that's going to happen.
You think you've simplified it enough and people still won't understand it, because you're just stuck in this mentality of like, that's what I'm trying to say, and you don't understand how you're trying to say it. Just doesn't make sense to other people. Right.
But because I've had a lot of experience with that, I've always been really good on rephrasing rephrasing it in different ways. So eventually it's like it's almost
Yeah.
like I'll keep rephrasing it and one of them's going to catch on.
Use one of the synonyms, one of them
Yeah.
is, yeah. So, but then you have the other side too of how when you were working at Office Depot, which is a store that sells office furniture, office supplies, and you worked at the computer part to help people buy computer peripherals, buy the correct printer. So you had at least two people that came to you that were trying to get help to buy something, and you couldn't understand them, and you don't even have an excuse because one of them was an English speaker, so it's not like speaking English a second language.
Yeah, that still like threw me off because I remember having my back to them, and they were asking for some help, and I was busy putting something up, and I'll be right with you, and they started talking to me before I could turn around, and I could not understand one word that they said, and I turned around, and it was a person with a very heavy Scottish accent, and I had to focus so much to understand what they were saying. It's like I couldn't get distracted at all by anything. It's like my full focus had to be there because it was such a strong accent, and I just remember thinking, it's like, wow, I felt like I forgot English. How does this? I could not believe that I missed so much of what he said, and I actually had to have him repeat some of the things that he was asking for.
Yeah, and that takes me back to how when we first met, you said that I had kind of a British Scottish accent, and I cannot understand how that would be possible because I couldn't make an accent right now. I just sound like this now, but I sounded different then.
Yeah, you've actually lost it. But when we first got together, certain words that you would say had more of a British accent than than how we would say it here in the States.
Okay.
Like your O's.
Okay, I still have a problem with the word cold.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so your O's had more kind of the
British.
Yeah, more of the British inflection than they would here. Well, especially here in California, the California.
At least it don't sound like a California girl, like a Valley girl. So that's good.
Yeah.
It's more standard.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
But the only way I can explain is that a lot of the books on tapes that my dad got me, they were British English. So some of the expressions maybe and some of the pronunciation, and also my two favorite bands back then, I would listen to a lot of Red Hot Chili Peppers and a lot of Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, but what I lived off, and I still go back to them today, is Simply Red from the UK, from England, and then What, Scotland. So these were the two kind of pronunciations that I was consuming a lot, even though I had a lot of the mainstream American music that was playing on the radio all the time. But maybe that's how I modeled that.
Yeah, it's. I just thought it was entertaining because you had a mix.
Okay.
You had a mix of you throw in a little, the more British type of style. Mixed in with more of the American. So, yeah, there was a mix there.
Which is funny because I never did it, I was never aware of that. And I would say that most of my vocabulary is American, even studying back then. Just like most of my vocabulary in Spanish is from Spain because I just, love that culture. But it's just weird because I could not fake an accent right now. I'm pretty bad with accents, but okay. So
yeah, that goes to one thing I always remember when we would start having conversations. When we were having conversations, I was always just so shocked on how well you were able to understand a lot of what I was saying, because I felt like I never had to going back to kind of change to change it to a more simpler English. You seem to pick up on a lot of the slangs for someone that was never out of Brazil, and even
barely out of my city.
And someone that really never hung out with a lot of Americans that use a lot of these slangs. And it probably from all the times watching TV, picking up a lot of the shows Especially that a lot of the shows actually come from California, so we share a lot of that.
Yeah. Just being a language nerd, I guess, just consuming all of that, and it was all in my head. And I remember when I was, younger, telling my parents I can think in English, and they couldn't understand what I was saying because they don't. So they're like, oh, okay, whatever. And then after I met you, and then they see us interacting, and my parents say that I sound different when I'm talking to them, not just, the tone of it's more the tone of my voice that they say that it's like my voice sounds different when I'm speaking in English or Portuguese. So after they saw me interacting with you, they were able to understand. It's like, oh, that's what she means by she thinks in English, because they just had the basic, school that they did back in college or something. And they're like, oh yeah, I can understand English. And then when they see us interacting, they're like, I have no idea what they're saying. So
yeah, that's what just amazes me when you watch people with languages, because being around you and your friends is just watching them like just hit that switch really fast. And some of them are really good at it. The one friend that, she's able to speak the Chinese and just flip that on and off. Like, was it the English, Russian, and then Chinese?
And some Spanish.
And then some Spanish. It's like just watching her just change that dial. And it's like especially with you, it's like you were able to change that.
But only between two languages, because you're talking about Dina. We haven't seen her in a long time. And then also another friend, Moritz, he speaks German, but then when he talks in English to us, no problem. And then he turns to his wife and speaks Spanish, and it's like, I couldn't do that. Yeah. I go, both channels, so English and Portuguese, no problem. If someone was speaking to me in Spanish or Italian, it's like, okay, I can follow, but I don't think in it, so I can't reply. So.
No, but you're able. My point is you're actually able to do that, because for speaking for myself, it's like when I'm here in the States, it's really interesting. On every single time I hear Portuguese, I automatically want to respond in English. Mm-hmm. I for some reason I can't turn that switch on. It's just very difficult for me to respond in Portuguese, even if someone is speaking Portuguese. It's almost I can understand anywhere from like 70 to 90% of what they're saying, depending on where their accent and where they're from. But when we go down to Brazil, it usually takes me about a week or so, and then I'm able to do it. I'm able to respond in Portuguese. I'm able, to get around it with the language. It was the same thing when we were in Italy. When we were in Italy, it was so frustrating because I grabbed the newspaper and I could sit there and read the newspaper just fine in Italian. But I couldn't flip that switch in speaking to people in Italian, because every single time I was ready to speak in Italian, Portuguese started coming in my head, and it just overwhelmed me, because it's like I wanted to speak Italian, but I couldn't speak Italian because Portuguese is coming to my head, and I'm thinking in English, and it just became overwhelming. Where it's just like this is becoming difficult,
and that's why you have to be trained as a translator or interpreter to actually do that as a job. Yeah,
it's tough, and that's the other part. Is I remember when we would go to Brazil, and when I was like just consuming the language, kind of absorbing the culture and the language, I just remember how exhausted and tired I was at the end of each day. Yeah, because that's all you're doing. You're just like soaking it in. And now is just like it doesn't affect me, but I remember when I first would go down there, I would be exhausted by it was just everything. But it's great, because that's, to me, but with how my brain works, that's what I need to learn. I need to be entrenched into that world, into that language, for me to learn it. It's very difficult for me to learn in a classroom, because it's almost like I could cheat. I don't have to use it. I could get around it. When I'm in Brazil, if we go to certain areas, you can't cheat. Yeah, you have to. You have to use it. Yeah, especially the one time when you went to São Paulo for the meeting, and I was in Santos with the kids, and I'm there with the kids, and so we have to go to the store. We have to go get something to eat. It's just like, yeah, I can't depend on people to speak English, especially in Santos.
Yeah.
Even though there might be, but I can't depend on that. So I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to use it. I
Yeah.
can't cheat. So I'm forced to be part of the culture, and I think that's also the nice thing that really helps is being in areas where you start learning that language because of the kind of just the environment too.
Because there are not going to be a lot of Americans or
Yeah.
people that speak English that kind
Yeah.
of come to you.
Because your parents would come over, but they don't speak English. So
Yeah.
how am I going to communicate with your parents? How am I going to go get something to
the kids
eat
were
for
still
the
too
kids?
small. It's like
Yeah.
Marissa does a better job now, but it's like she
Yeah.
was 7. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was
So this-
harder for her to.
So if we want to go to a place, it's like okay, if we get a taxi, how am I going to communicate with
Yeah.
the taxi drivers? It's like I got to speak to them. I got to
Yeah.
know the language. But that's also something that I noticed that happens is when you weren't there. I got around just fine, I wasn't at that conversation level. I couldn't have conversations with people, but I could communicate enough where
Could survive.
I could survive. But that's the other part is I noticed like a lot of times that when you're there is I noticed that I've become used to you're the one that always engages.
Just get lazy.
Yeah. So that's the other part. It's just like I'm so used to you're the one that always takes the initiative. You're the one that always engages.
But there's the one problem of how when we were in Italy, and then just to try to get things done quicker instead of me trying to think in Italian and trying to communicate. Like when we went to get like my skin was too dry, I wanted to get lotion. We went to this pharmacy, and then I tried to asked the guy in pretty plain English if he had lotion that I could buy, and it ended up being 20 euros, and I got so upset. It's like it shouldn't be this expensive. Now if I had spoken Italian to him, or even if I had tried to speak Portuguese to him, it would probably be half the price.
Well, no, if you remember, we started to catch on because when we would go eat at these little shops and we would eat at these little places. And it's interesting because when we would first go to these little shops, we would be charged a certain amount for the food. And then one time, it's just like we communicated in Portuguese, not English, and the price changed.
Yeah.
Because if you remember, it was this little booth that we got sandwiches from.
Yep.
And we went to that booth a couple times. When we spoke English, it was more expensive
Yep.
than when we spoke Portuguese.
Yep.
And then we were like, okay. So everywhere we started going, we made sure that the person heard us speak Portuguese rather than English. Mm-hmm. So we got I guess, the normal price.
Exactly. It's like, they're tourists, but they're okay. They're not Americans.
Yeah.
And going back to how you're talking about getting around in Brazil when you're speaking Portuguese and trying to soak it in. I know that you get very frustrated when you try to speak Portuguese to someone. You're trying to reply. You're saying it correctly, but people just look at you like they have no idea. Maybe like you were looking at this Scottish guy and you had no idea what he was saying. Even though he was speaking English, you couldn't understand it. And even though you're speaking Portuguese to someone, and even to friends of mine, they couldn't understand you speaking Portuguese because they're expecting English to come out of your mouth. So even though you're speaking Portuguese and you're trying to reply correctly, they just look at you and then you get frustrated.
Yeah, that's always been very frustrating. Going around in Brazil is the fact that when you're trying to speak and they don't respond, to me it comes across as they're being rude. And they're not being helpful. Mm-hmm. Because it's here in the States. I always found a lot of people like me, or like around me and my friends. We were always very helpful and encouraging, in trying to get people to understand. This is what they're saying. because we always live so close to the border, so you get a lot of Mexicans that won't speak English. So what you do is you work with them. You try to find out with little Spanish that we know because we live so close. You try to work with the people when they're trying to communicate. And I couldn't tell you how many times I've been in Brazil, and you just get these just blank looks, like there's no response. Or what they do is, I've actually had it where I've talked to people and then they just smile, giggle, and laugh at you. And it's like, how is that? I mean, okay, I don't understand. Did I say something wrong, or what? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah.
I mean, because if I said something if I said a joke in Portuguese, okay, I'm fine with that.
That's the right response,
right? But if I'm asking a question, or I'm or I need help with something, and that's the response you give me. It comes across as it's just a rude way to respond to people, and that's off-putting. And what happens is that discourages some people to even try to communicate, because it's like, why even make the effort to try to communicate in their own language when they're not trying to also encourage you. To keep speaking that language, because that's not a good way to encourage people, to do that.
But I've tried to explain to you that it's like, don't take it personal. And I know that it's frustrating, but try to remember that, especially where I used to live, where my family is at, there are not a lot of people that are going to speak English. So what happens is, people don't know how to react. If you go to Rio, if you go to São Paulo, you're going to find a lot more people that are going to be comfortable engaging with someone that speaks English, because there's a lot more tourists around, but not in my city. So what happens is, first they get completely nervous when there's a foreigner around, and it could be, American, German, whatever. I would say that it's not true when it's someone speaking Spanish, because we do have, so many Spanish countries around Brazil that whenever we have someone that speaks Spanish, we always treat like hermanos, So it's more, Brazilians will be more welcoming when it's someone speaking Spanish, even though we have rivalries with Argentina because of soccer. But anyway, with you, people will always just shut down. It's not because it's you, but it's because it's English. And going to school to learn English in Brazil, and how we are mocked about, if you say like that, they're going to make fun of you. So we kind of grow up going through the system of learning English in Brazil as, if you go to Disney, because that's where all Brazilians want to go to. If you go to Disney and you ask for a hot doggy, for a hot dog, you just say hot dog with a Brazilian accent, they're going to make fun of you. So in the back of our minds, there's always this thing of how, all Americans are going to make fun of me. So when they see an American, they freeze. So that's how they're reacting to you. I understand it's counterproductive. They're not going to help you. They're just going to giggle and walk away when you're trying to buy something. But that's just the reaction that,
I'm just telling how me and my friends have experienced it. I can't speak for other people. I know there's other people out there that that are going to make fun of it. I mean, that's just going to happen everywhere. Yeah. But the point I'm just trying to make is, the fact is, when you're going to a place of business, when you're going into, to ask for help, like at a hotel, right, or any professional place, I don't think it's the appropriate way. They just don't know how to act differently, because there's this trauma, But I've actually been very surprised the last couple times we've gone down there. I've been really surprised on how many more people speak English. I mean,
it's been 2 decades, and things change. I mean, remember the internet when we first met? Yeah. So there are a lot more people that never went to take English classes at a formal setting. They know a lot more English because they have YouTube. Pretty much, they just YouTube has been teaching them English all along. So what just still blows me away is the time that we went to the airport, and this is like the one guy that was helping, because the guy that was helping us out. Do you remember the one time where we went up there and I couldn't trace an accent into this guy at all? Then he turns around,
speaking Portuguese to some of his coworkers.
Yeah.
Then a Japanese person comes up. He starts speaking Japanese to that person there, and I'm just like going, "Wow!"
I think there was some Spanish in there too. Yeah,
there was some,
maybe even French. I don't remember.
But it just amazed me just how when you're talking, about. How people respond, like at the airport, they're not going to do that. But, it's just...
Because the qualification for you to work at the airport, you should speak at least 2 languages, so...
Yeah, and it seems like in Brazil, they always speak more than 2.
Yeah.
A lot of them do.
Yeah. But there's this thing of like, you have to learn English so you can be successful. That's the mentality that we get from, very early on. That's why we have English classes in pre-K in Brazil. So, it's just you have to. And then when they're faced with an actual setting that is not the book and the little things that we memorize, they just freeze. So.
Yeah. My opinion is some Americans, I think, need to learn English, especially when we talk about how much slang we use.
Yeah. No, slang is fine, but it's just when we learn English as, a second language, we just learn a lot. We learn it differently. Like I still remember talking to some of our friends who are very educated, Americans, English speakers, that they speak English very well, and they could not understand when I was telling them about countable and uncountable nouns, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "You don't say I want a water. You just say I want some water because you can't count water." Unless you say 1 drop of water and you be very specific, you have to say a glass of water. You can't just say I want a water. Like some people would say I want a coffee, but it sounds weird because you can't count coffee. It's not 1 coffee. It's 1 cup of coffee. You know what I mean?
But okay, you're talking about something. Is it my brain that works
as a monolingual speaker?
Yeah. Here, when you say I want a water, I'm thinking of, is it in a cup or a bottle? That's what you're referring to when you want a water.
But that's improper because that's how we're hammered down when we're learning English, of how water is, you can count. So you have to say, I want some water. I want a little water. I want a lot of water. You have to use some kind of quantifier because water you can't count. It's not, the same thing like, I want 1 sandwich. It's okay because you can have a unit of sandwich, but you can have a unit of water. That's why. So when I mention countable and uncountable nouns, my friends are like, and that's what monolingual Americans that only speak English, that speak English well, they're educated, they mistake fewer and less. And that's what I make fun of because I have to.
Yeah, constantly.
Yeah. So that's why I have that shirt that says, I'm silently correcting your grammar. Because every time someone says, less people, no, it's fewer. So.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the whole part. Living here is we're going to use a lot of improper ways of saying things, but that's it's understood.
Yeah.
And we don't go around correcting every time someone says that, except for if you're a language person.
Oh, well, that's my job.
Yeah.